In the hidden corners of diverse ecosystems, a tireless engineer shapes the landscape, the Dichotomius Annae, an enigmatic dung beetle. Join us on a fascinating exploration into the world of these humble creatures, as we unravel their evolutionary history, ecological significance, and the challenges it confronts. Dung beetles in the genus Dichotomius, including the species Dichotomius Annae, provide vital waste removal ecosystem services across South America. They inhabit tropical and subtropical regions and have evolved to specialize in feeding on mammalian feces. With nearly 100 recognized species, Dichotomius is one of the most diverse dung beetle genera in South America. Dichotomius Annae is widely distributed across Brazil, where it plays an important role recycling nutrients and shaping habitat structure. However, the loss of native habitat and mammalian diversity threatens populations of this ecologically important species. Evolutionary history. Like all dung beetles, the evolutionary origins of Dichotomius Annae can be traced back to the time of the dinosaurs in the Cretaceous period around 90 million years ago. At this time, the first flowering plants evolved, supporting an increase in mammalian herbivore diversity and consequently more dung resources. Dichotomius as a genus arose approximately 47 million years ago in South America. Dichotomius Annae belongs to the Dichotomius mamerta species group, the most species-rich assemblage of South American Dichotomius. D. Annae can be distinguished from close relatives by examining subtle differences in the male genitalia and the lamellae structure of the antennae. Isolation in fragmented forest habitats across Brazil is likely the main driver of diversification within the group. Each species specializes on the dung of particular regional mammals. Unique adaptations to localized conditions lead to the evolution of new ecological species like Dichotomius Annae. Like all dung beetles, Dichotomius Annae exhibits a stocky rounded body shape and shortened wing casings ideal for tunneling below dung piles. Their hind legs are equipped with large claws specialized for manipulating dung. As a Dichotomius species, Dichotomius Annae displays metallic green, gold, or copper coloring of the shortened elytra, wing casings. The surface of the elytra in Dichotomius Annae is notably smooth compared to close relatives. Legs, head, and thorax generally exhibit a reddish hue. Like most dung beetle species, Dichotomius Annae displays distinct sexual dimorphism. Males are substantially smaller than females. Males also possess elongated forward-facing horns used in battles with other males when competing for prime dung piles. The lamellae on the antennae are important chemosensory organs allowing detection of dung odor plumes from over a kilometer away. These lamellae are notably rounder in Dichotomius Annae compared to related species. The front legs contain specialized digging adaptations for penetrating soil beneath dung piles. Ecology. As a dung beetle, Dichotomius Annae provides important ecosystem services through the burial and processing of mammalian feces. This activity limits the spread of parasites and disease while returning nutrients to the soil. Dichotomius Annae beetles are most abundant in tropical forests, savannas, and grasslands where large diverse tropical mammal communities generate substantial dung resources. However, habitat destruction across their range has likely contributed to population declines through loss of small forest-dependent mammals. Dichotomius Annae detects fresh dung piles from odors wafting up to a kilometer away. Peak feeding activity occurs in the early morning before temperatures rise. Several Dichotomius species often compete at the same dung pile, with larger, more aggressive species displacing smaller ones like Dichotomius Annae from high-quality fresh dung. As a result, Dichotomius Annae frequently utilizes older dung piles and the feces of smaller-sized mammals that are largely avoided by bigger competitors. After mating, female Dichotomius Annae construct an underground brood ball of dung within which they oviposit their eggs. Larvae develop entirely concealed within this subterranean chamber over the course of several weeks, progressing through 3 developmental stages prior to pupation and adult emergence. Development times depend heavily on ambient temperatures. Cooler weather often encountered at higher elevations can greatly lengthen overall generation times. When conditions allow, Dichotomius Annae may complete up to 3 generations per year. Habitat and behavior. Dichotomius Annae has been recorded from virtually all non-arid habitat types across Brazil up to elevations approaching 1,000 meters. Records exist from the states of Espírito Santo, Minas Gerais, São Paulo and as far west as Brasília. Core habitat likely centers in areas of Atlantic forest, an endangered biome reduced to less than 15% of its original extent. As is common with dung beetles, the daily life of adult Dichotomius Annae revolves around the detection and utilization of fresh dung piles for feeding and reproduction. Adults frequent game trails and areas of mammal activity in search of feces, utilizing keen chemoreception abilities to detect odors from great distances away. Upon detection of fresh dung, Dichotomius Annae uses specialized digging claws on the forelegs to tunnel below the pile where mating occurs, and females oviposit eggs into brood balls constructed entirely of dung material. Developing larvae depend completely on this food source for their growth. Several Dichotomius species often compete at dung piles, with larger, more aggressive beetles displacing subordinate smaller species from prime intact dung piles by force. Consequently, Dichotomius Annae is often relegated to marginal or aged piles of dung avoided by superior competitors. Both genders exhibit crepuscular peak activity patterns in the early morning and late afternoon when temperatures are coolest. Conclusion. The dung beetle Dichotomius Annae is widely distributed across forest and savanna habitats of Brazil, where it plays an integral yet underappreciated role in healthy ecosystem functioning through feces burial and nutrient recycling services. These activities help restrict the spread of parasites that could otherwise impact wildlife or even humans. Dung beetles like Dichotomius Annae depend on intact mammal communities to continuously supply fresh dung resources. However, widespread habitat destruction and fragmentation in Brazil over the past half-century has led to substantial biodiversity loss, including local extirpations of many small forest-dwelling mammals preferred by this species. Exotic African pasture grasses also generate dung lacking proper nutritional content for Dichotomius larvae development. While Dichotomius Annae itself has not been assessed for extinction risk by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, many close relatives have declined substantially from habitat loss. More surveys and population monitoring efforts focused on this species are critically needed to clarify its current conservation status across the threatened Atlantic forest biome. Preserving intact communities of small native mammals should be viewed as a top habitat management objective where Dichotomius Annae occurs. Beyond just biodiversity considerations, it's worth highlighting the long evolutionary history encapsulated by endemic South American insects like Dichotomius Annae. Dung beetles diverged into specialized ecological roles and intricate relationships with mammals over 50 million years ago across the continent. Preserving these fragile insect species ensures these exceptionally long histories of unique coevolution remain unbroken. In the age of rampant anthropogenic threats, the fact specialized organisms like Dichotomius Annae continue fulfilling roles potentially dating back to the age of dinosaurs remains particularly worth celebrating.